All right, take your 5-second countdown, Mike, and we'll be live here.
A good morning and afternoon to all of you across the country, as I would like to welcome you all to the Benefits Alliance Group Keynote Speaker Series. My name is Mike McCowan, and as the president of the Benefits Alliance Group, I'm so excited to be here today to have this interactive conversation with our speaker, Mary Ann Baynton. As always, our Keynote Speaker Series, they're focused on highlighting the challenges and the issues facing employers across the country. We're so excited to continue to offer this thoughtful content to our advisor firms across the country. Now, throughout the last 16 months, employers across Canada have collectively faced the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has created. As many employers begin to start transitioning back to the workplace, how can they successfully help support their employees and navigate the uncertainty of our new normal? Luckily for us, we have a true industry leader who is often called the godmother of psychological health and safety, Mary Ann Baynton. Today's session is really going to be a conversation. So if you have questions, please utilize the chat function, and I'm going to be asking these questions throughout the next hour. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so I really encourage you to ask questions which are important to you and your employees. I'd also like to thank our partners from Canada Life who have collaborated with the Benefits Alliance on this session. With us today is Francesco Dischiani, Vice President of Sales and Business Development for Group Customer at Canada Life. And he's going to be with us to share a few words about Canada Life's commitment to mental health and help introduce Mary Ann. So with that, I'll pass it off to Francesco, and I'll be back in a few moments to start the conversation with Mary Ann. Francesco?
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. And always great to spend some time with Benefits Alliance partners and their clients. So really excited for a great session today. I always love hearing Mary Ann speak and always have some great takeaways that I can incorporate into my own business as well as supporting our clients. At Canada Life, we have an aspirational purpose statement to improve the financial, physical, and mental well-being of Canadians. We feel this well-being journey is the fundamental path we're all on as Canadians. And it's really central to us living our best possible lives, which is really what we aim and endeavor to do each and every day. Employers such as yourselves play a critical role in empowering Canadians through the programs you generously offer. The mental health pillar is one of utmost importance for us and represents an area of increased focus for quite some time. More critically, it's only been amplified as we've lived through these pandemic times. And I think we're facing new challenges, new opportunities, and having an empowered view on mental health only helps us support each other and support our plan members better going forward. Since 2007, we've been truly honored to work alongside Mary Ann Baynton in creating the workplace strategies for mental health. The work Mary Ann and her team have done in creating and curating this resource has been instrumental both within our organization as well as with our clients. We've made the resource available for free for all Canadian employers and are very proud of the collaborative work we've done in empowering Canadian employers to better support their employees in improving their resilience and ultimately their mental health. Mary Ann is an expert in workplace health and psychological safety. She consults across the country and also serves as Director of Collaboration for Workplace Strategies for Mental Health. Mary Ann strives to eliminate unnecessary suffering and improve lives. As I've said, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure to hear Mary Ann speak many times, and a dynamic speaker. You're going to really enjoy the next hour, and I have my notepad ready because, I'll be taking notes that I can incorporate into my day-to-day and hope you all find some real value in this session as well. So on behalf of Canada Life, thank you, Mike, for the opportunity, and looking forward to hearing Mary Ann speak.
Thanks, Francesco. So I just want to say that was a lovely introduction, but I think for the people listening, that what you want to know the most about me is that I have, over the last couple decades, personally managed at least a dozen people directly who had a diagnosis of a mental illness. So I really want to invite you to ask any questions, although most of my answers are general about leadership and about organizational development, psychological safety. If you've got a question about something that's more specific, feel free to ask, and I'll share what I've learned the hard way so that you don't have to. Mike?
Well, thank you, Marianne. And, I dubbed you, and obviously this was on your website, the godmother of psychological health and safety. That's a big title. But something that I think, as a Francesco could attest to is a true fact. And, your career has really been devoted to the challenges of supporting employees around mental health in the workplace. So as you look back at the last 16 months and what we've all experienced together, what has been the biggest change in perspective towards mental health in the workplace?
It's so funny, Mike, because when the pandemic first started, so March 2020, I had 16 cancellations in the matter of 2 weeks, that people they weren't doing face-to-face events. And so I thought, well, that's the end of my work. But what happened is that I found out that more people were interested, more employers, more HR professionals, more leaders were interested in how do I deal with the fears, the concerns, the stress, the change, the uncertainty that my employees are dealing with right now. And I joke that I think I manifested the pandemic because I kept wishing that more people understood that mental health and supporting mental health of employees isn't just for their well-being or because we're nice people, that it actually has a direct impact on performance, on productivity, on civility and respect, on engagement, on innovation, on creativity. And I think a lot of people get it now. They get it because of their personal experience dealing with this pandemic, and they get it because they're trying to support employees.
Now, there's been a big change, but I think we're all aware that some barriers still exist. Can you describe what those barriers still look like? And how can we kind of move as we move out of COVID and we move into, the end of 2021 into 2022? How can we kind of begin to knock down some of those barriers?
Yeah. So there's two sort of foundational rules around this. The first one is ask rather than tell people, ask them how they're feeling, ask them how you can deal with their fears and their concerns about coming back to work or coming back to a routine, and really listen so that the solution that you come up with is actually addressing the fears and concerns that they have. When we did a survey recently, we thought that people were going to say, the commute to work is what I'm not looking forward to. The change in routine is what is most difficult for me. I don't want the office politics again. We thought these were going to be the things that people said they were most concerned about. And yet, even among vaccinated Canadians, fear of COVID was still the number one concern. And so if you as an employer are making assumptions about what your team, your employees are concerned about, you might be making a mistake, like we were in our assumptions. And so we wrote the back to work checklist for mindful leaders. It's on our website, and like everything on our website, it's free. But it basically says, ask your employees before they come back, what are the fears and concerns? Tell them after you've read that what you're going to do to address them. And then, and this is important, and then ask them what else. Because there still could be other things, or the way that you've addressed them isn't dealing with it. And by doing this, you're going to make a very bumpy ride a lot smoother.
Now, what's the biggest mistake that an employer can do in approaching this?
Assuming that all employees feel the same way is
Yeah.
the biggest mistake. Some of the employees will have gone through truly a traumatic time, whether their trauma was because of fear of COVID, loss of a loved one, financial stress, family breakdown. And some of the employees are going to be so excited to give up quality family time and come back to the workplace. So you're going to have a whole range of emotions. And if we do a cookie cutter approach, people are going to fall through the cracks.
And I would agree with that. I think we often try to, an employer may want to paint everyone with the same brush. And unfortunately, in this type of scenario, that's really the last thing that you should be approaching.
And sorry, Mike, I was just going to say that to also validate for employees that that entire range of emotion is to be expected.
Mhm.
Yeah.
As an employer, to have that conversation, what does that look like? And when is it most appropriate to bring in other resources, to rely on your employee assistance program or other services that may be part of your benefits program?
So if we're talking about the return to work and helping with that, I really believe in the cascade approach, which is that intact teams have the conversation cascaded up to upper management, and then upper management will look at, okay, these are the things that we're going to do organization wide because of the need in many different teams. And then the teams can look at, okay, but we're not addressing this, which is a big issue for us. And so we can do something differently. Now, that's just the bigger back to work. When we're talking about individuals, the way that I see it is that we listen to what the employees need. And our job as leaders is to say, how can I help you to be successful while you're here at work? And if you need other resources for your personal, your health, your finances, your relationships, if you need other resources for that, I'm not the best person to give you that. Let me find resources for you. So that's how we differentiate. If it's helping them in the workplace, we don't send them to the EAP to deal with performance issues. We don't send them to the EAP to deal with conflict in the workplace. We don't send them to the EAP because the relationship between the leader and the employee isn't good. That's our job. But we do send them for health issues, personal issues, and anything else that is outside the scope of work.
Just looking at the questions that are coming through, and I think it's appropriate for us to kind of help set some context around terminology. So I love that this question jumped in. Can you help describe the difference between an employee who may be challenged with burnout versus an employee who may be challenged with COVID fatigue? How should, what is the difference? Because it's clear, but how should employers be handling these differently?
Yeah. And so I think the short answer is they shouldn't, because they're not diagnosing, they're not treating, they're not prescribing drugs or giving drugs out. And if they are, we have a different conversation to have. But you treat people in such a way that you're always asking, and I'll just give you this quickly. I always ask 3 questions. What do you need to be successful, to do the job, and to leave at the end of the day with energy left over? Burnout, serious mental illness, stress, COVID fatigue, same question. Second question, what are you going to do to support your own well-being at work? So in other words, you, the employee, have a level of control and responsibility for your own well-being, whether you have serious mental illness, you have COVID fatigue, burnout, or just stress. So what are you going to do to help yourself? And that question usually comes down to whether they're going to take their breaks, whether they're going to manage their workload in a certain way, whether they're going to focus their attention in a certain way, but things that will help them. The third question is, how do you want me to support you when issues arise now? So if there's a performance issue, how can I approach you? If you're not feeling well and I'm worried that you're getting worse, how do you want me to approach you? All of this is in developing a workplace plan on the website. But the idea is, it's not your job to diagnose. It's not your job to know. Your job is simply to help someone be as successful as they can at work, and then link them to resources.
I was, as I was preparing today, I'm not sure if, for the people in the audience, for yourself, Bumble, which is a dating app, just recently announced that for the week of June 21st, all 700 of their employees across the world were receiving this entire week off to manage burnout. So this is obviously an example of an organization trying to address, an issue to help performance. But I don't expect all employers across Canada to have that ability. So Marianne, are there other solutions out there that, and employers should be aware of, where they can kind of tackle this specific challenge?
Yeah, again, with burnout, there's a lot of organizational approaches to it. But the main things for burnout are to help employees focus on one thing at a time, to help prioritize the work, and very importantly, to help employees understand the value of their work, meaning how it contributes to the organizational good, how it contributes to the greater good, so that they know that what they do matters and how they themselves are valuable to the organization. Burnout often happens because people feel that what they do doesn't matter and who they are doesn't matter to the organization. And while there's lots of very specific strategies available in terms of check-ins and, managing workload and different things like that, I'd say that if we can help every person regroup and reprioritize and make sure they know what difference they're making in the organization, that those are the most critical.
Mm-hmm. You briefly talked about a workplace plan that you have on the website. Can you elaborate on that and how, an employer who may be on the call with us today could take that solution and really apply it for their own organization?
We actually even put it together in a resource called Supporting Employee Success. So it's an entire resource that walks you through the job expectations that are more difficult to talk about, meeting deadlines, attention to detail, using good judgment, workplace relationships, the sorts of things that mental health will impact, but mental health writ large. So people who are stressed out. So this walks you through where the employer is required to assess what the expectation is for that job. Then the employee has a place where they say, I believe this is my current capability to meet that expectation. And then the last part of it is to really think about what are solutions. And we list, you could call them accommodations, but they're not necessarily under the duty to accommodate, but strategies, solutions that have worked for others who struggle in each of the areas. So we're giving a variety of solutions, and between the employer and the employee, they can look at these and choose the ones that work for them. All of that is in preparation to create the workplace plan. So you're not just answering those questions which is how I created a workplace plan. But you're actually getting guidance every step of the way. And this came from some people responding to my approach with the questions and saying, well, that's great for you, but I don't know how to tease that out. I don't know how to turn that into an agreement. And so supporting employee success does that.
Another question that's come through from one of our advisors is on the topic of languishing. So this idea of being demotivated with no line of sight. I think everyone's experienced that moment once in a while. And, you know, when we see that news continues to be negative. So my question is, how can employers help address this feeling for employees?
Mm-hmm. In terms of languishing, what the evidence shows us is it's a very low level of energy, a very low level of mood. And if we're there for more than a couple of weeks, it could have a very negative effect on our physical and mental health. So we do want to move people from there. And the best way to do that is to change it up. If you can imagine, if we're on a spiral, a downward spiral, and we just keep following that, we'll continue to go in that direction. We have to change it up. Now, people who have had clinical depression, which of course is more than languishing, have told us about how once they understand their illness more, at the very earliest signs, they change things up. Some of them change the way they commute to work. Some of them change their hairstyle. Some of them change what they consume in terms of alcohol or food so that it's better for them in the workplace. When you have entire teams who may be languishing because of this pandemic, then you want to change things up in a positive way. And that doesn't mean that we're just going to party all the time or, but it does mean thinking about projects differently, swapping tasks, changing up interdisciplinary teams if you've got teams, but really looking at how can we make work fresh and new and interesting for people. We have different ways of people being motivated, right? Some of them will want an opportunity to speak in public, to attend meetings, to coordinate with people. And others would want an opportunity to dive into data analysis. You as the leader, understanding that, just try to give them opportunities that are new and fresh.
A question that's just come through, and I think it talks about this, but we're talking a lot about the employee, and I think it's important to consider, the people managers that are involved in this, because many of them were in, management roles pre-pandemic, but as someone who's on the front line, many of them go, I didn't really sign up for this, and this is an additional step, both emotionally and physically involved in my role that wasn't part of it before. So, and I appreciate the question that was sent in. How do you support those managers as they're having conversations around all of these issues, who have said, this was not an expectation for me before?
Right. I think that just because of the younger generations coming up, there is a different expectation for leaders. The younger generation sees mental health as part of the human condition, not as something that you have to hide and go deal with quietly. I know my parents and grandparents, we never talked about somebody with a mental health condition. We talked about somebody with a nervous breakdown or even heart attack or whatever, and no mention was made of the mental health that was behind those things. Today, the younger people expect that that's going to be part of it. So all leaders are going to have to adjust to become more emotionally intelligent, to become more psychologically safe. And there's a few things that I would suggest to start. The first thing is just understanding that psychological health and safety is not about you being a mind reader and being a mental health expert. In fact, being a mental health expert still makes it unethical for you to diagnose or treat people that work for you because it's a power imbalance. So that's not the expectation, but the expectation is A, that you do no harm. And secondly, that your employees have what Dr. Martin Shane called safe voice, that they are able to speak up and talk about what is going on without fear of retribution or humiliation. How do you start to learn to do that? There's several things that I can say. The easiest one is knowing what psychological health and safety is, that you ask yourself the question before you make any decision, before you have any interaction, how might this impact the psychological health and safety of employees? That's a first step. A second step is that every interaction with an employee should have the underlying intention of, am I able to support this person to be successful at work? And again, if you ask yourself that and choose your reactions on that basis, you're going to be pretty good. Now, as we go up the scale, Mike, they can also do the psychologically safe leader assessment, which is simply leadership strategies that are known to support positive psychological health and safety. So that's free as well on the Workplace Strategy site. And there's great training like Mindful Leader, which is from Mindful Employer Canada. And they've just put it online because of the pandemic, but practical ways to learn to be the type of leader that people need and expect now.
Now, many of our participants today are part of organizations where their work is their family and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So to the point that you just made, how does that spin take when you're having to have a conversation with someone where you have a personal relationship or an intimate relationship, form that close bond with them? It's a difficult conversation to have.
It is, and yet, if we're doing it right, it can be held with family, with friends, because the questions are meant to draw from the individual what they need, not pry into their personal life or, get into things that are outside of scope. So if you stick to holding back on your pearls of wisdom, your advice, if you stick to trying to help people solve their own problems, there's not too many landmines to step on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Appreciate the questions that are coming in so far, and please continue to use the chat feature available to ask them. Sticking on the topic of managers, and a question that came in prior, how do we support them in really assimilating back to kind of the increased pace that may arise to pre-pandemic normal work volumes? So, and the assumption that work has maybe steadied off over the last bit, how do we help support managers kind of bring that back up?
Yeah. It depends, of course, on the organization and the demands on the organization. Ideally, what you would do is show a 3-week trajectory where people are going to come back, as you would with a return to work for any leave.
Yeah.
You would have a graduated return to work. So what would be ideal is to do that, to have a graduated return to work for the people that come back into the workplace, maybe even stagger so that everybody doesn't come back the same day, and show them how you're going to build on getting them back up to full capacity with check-ins along the way to see what the challenges are. Some people are going to need to be retrained.
Yeah.
Almost everybody's going to need to be reoriented. And most people will need to be reintegrated to the team. So if you see it as if it was a return to work, a graduated return to work, I think that's where you're going to have the most success.
Now that's a budget and cost involved. What do you say to employers out there who don't necessarily have the time or resources to change their workplace?
And this is why I say it really depends, is that maybe in that case, if I didn't have time or money, I would probably set up a meeting with my employees and ask them to tell me what they
Mhm.
think is the best way for them to be able to come back and hit the ground running and what they needed from me. Because nothing that I, as the leader, imposes is going to be as sure in terms of getting employee commitment and engagement as having their feedback. And of course, you can say no to certain things if it's not going to work.
Mhm.
I always say, though, before you say no, ask why. Why do you think this is going to work? Because you can maybe give them what they need without giving them what they asked for. But if you just say, what do you need? No, that's ridiculous. Can't do that. That's going to shut them down. But if you say, what do you need to come back and hit the ground running? And you say, okay, well, why that particular thing? How will that support you to get up to speed and to do the job? Oh, okay, so you just need to have, access to this piece of
Mhm.
equipment, or and then you can problem solve.
And I think that comes down to a larger theme that I kind of want to jump into is communication, and how that really plays an important role in supporting your employees as we return to the workplace. So jumping off that, what is the most well, we'll broaden this, but what is an appropriate way to communicate to employees when they're feeling challenged by mental health? And does this need to be adjusted to a hybrid model where some employees may be in the office and some may still be working virtually?
Yeah. In terms of communicating to somebody who's struggling with their mental health, it's always going to be difficult if you never discuss mental well-being at work. And people think that what that means is we need to know the symptoms of depression and schizophrenia and addiction. And that's not it. What it is embedding in your regular conversations. How are people coping? What are the strategies that you use when you're stressed or overwhelmed? How do you say no when you know that it's going to be impossible for you to meet a deadline? When do you have the highest energy at work? What kind of work really drains you? And these kinds of conversations, when they become part of the norm, then when somebody's struggling, first of all, somebody said to me, well, how can you see burnout in a virtual setting? I said, well, you really can't see it. So what you have to do is hear it. And the way you hear it is by having these conversations where everyone is required to respond and connect. And again, we've got a lot of team building activities that are already set up for 15 minutes or less in some cases, where you embed this in a team meeting all the time.
Yeah.
And then it's not a difficult conversation. You just say, hey, Mike, at the meeting today, when we were talking about this, I could see that it was weighing heavy on you. And I just wondered if you wanted to chat about that. And it's an easy opening, rather than me saying, Mike, you're looking kind of mentally ill these days.
But with that, Marianne, how do you move from a workplace where the discussion around mental health and mental wellness may have not been there? And how do you transition to a workplace where that is? Because I almost see that as a little bit of a barrier to some where that has not been the status quo. So as an employer, how do you transition towards that?
You got the perfect window of opportunity right now.
Yeah.
To say, we've never talked much about coping and stress. We've also never gone through a life-changing event like this pandemic. So from now on, I want to check in. I want to tell you first about my experience through the pandemic as your leader. I thought I coped really well, and yet there were some days I was so down, I couldn't focus. I just, it felt kind of miserable, and I just got frustrated. And this is what I did, so that you take responsibility to break the ice. You
Yeah.
take responsibility to be what Brene calls confidently vulnerable. And that's what the new leaders are going to be, confidently vulnerable. I can talk about my weaknesses because I know they're part of the human condition, and I know that I'm going to put strategies in place to deal with them. And the expectation is that you will do the same, and we will do that as a team.
Now, you talked about some team building exercise that may kind of help support that. Can you elaborate a bit on that? What would that look like, Marianne?
Sure. So we've got like literally dozens of them, but the team huddle where everybody will come together and just say, this is what I'm working on. This is what my challenges are. This is where I need help. So it's just a simple thing, but it's done every day. You get to hear, and in 10 minutes, the whole team's gone through. If you need another meeting, you'll do it. There's mistake meetings, which is saying, these are the mistakes that I made, and either this is how I fix them, or this is where I need your advice on how to fix it. That you start to open a dialogue where we're not hiding our mistakes until they become a crisis.
Yeah.
We're openly discussing them. There's ones where people assess their own strengths using a free resource, but they come together to talk about how they'll use those strengths when there's challenges at work.
Mhm.
And so we learn about each other, we learn about ourselves, and we also get more cohesive as a team using these kinds of activities. And they're not, tell me about your toilet training or you have attachment issues. They're not clinical types. They're about work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess that takes buy-in from the employee and the employer. So my question is, what do you say to an employee who may feel vulnerable to talk about their mistakes, who may not feel comfortable speaking that not only with their peers, but with their employer, their manager as well?
Yeah, I always say to the leader, you need to do this a couple of times yourself without asking your employees to share, but to tell them, I'm going to do this a few times. And the idea is that when we come together, that you will come with some mistake or challenge that you've had in the workplace. And you're either going to ask for help or tell us how you solved it so that we can all learn from it. And it just becomes not a way, it becomes that, well, the leader does it, so therefore it must be okay. And we learn to respond to mistakes with problem solving and not with condemnation or ridicule.
Now, we slightly discussed this earlier in the presentation, but another question kind of came in around that. How do we create a clear message for all employees who all may have experienced different moments, life changes during COVID? What's the best approach, and how do you take that into account versus email versus video versus in person?
Yeah, so I think that we need to do this before they come back, if it's at all possible. So to do it virtually, and I use the Kubler-Ross change curve, which says that when we're hit with a crisis, when we're hit with a stressor, when we're hit with a change, that we have different stages. So we go from shock to like shock and disbelief, what's happening, what's going on. We can be in denial that, well, this isn't even real, this is just overblown. We can be frustrated. The important piece is the stage of experimenting, where we start trying things. Well, maybe if I go out for a walk every day, or maybe if I, change my workstation, and we start to experiment with what will allow us to cope. Then we have the decision stage, where we say, did this thing that I experiment with, did it work for me?
Mm-hmm.
And if it does, then you integrate it, and it becomes part of your normal routine, part of the way that you think. And to say that both during the pandemic and during our return to work, we're going to be all over the place with all of these different things at any given time, and that's okay. But what we want to do is start to learn from what people are going through, talk about the challenges, talk about the mistakes that we've made, and work together to find whatever our new normal is going to be. And so you set the stage, you normalize the range of emotions, and you set a goal. We're all working together to find what the best solution is going to be for all of us. I don't know what it is. I put in the things that we've talked about, but we're evolving. The other,
Yeah.
sorry, Mike, just one more thing about that is that everybody should expect to be completely drained every day for the first couple weeks because we're adjusting. And to set that expectation that the first couple of weeks are going to be more challenging, and then we're going to start to get into something that will approximate a routine.
Now, with that, how do you support an employee who may feel anxiety about returning to the workplace? What steps should employers take around supporting them?
Right. So a couple of things. One is if you've asked the question and they have shared what their stress and anxieties are, you've put out what you're going to put in place, and then you've asked if there's anything else. So you've already done that. And but then if there's a single individual for whom, say, social anxiety is just overwhelming, then this is a case where you say, what else can I do to help you with that particular issue? And in supporting employee success, you'll see that stressful environments or confrontational environments, exposure to that are some of the things that are in there. But then you're working with that individual to see what you can do in the workplace. And if that's not enough, then that's where they need outside help, right?
Yeah.
They need therapy or support from a clinician.
And then my follow-up to that, and you may have to put your legal hat on to some of these. What happens when an employee does not want to return to the office?
Okay, so disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I can't give legal advice, but listening to different lawyers presenting on this, if the employees were working from the job site before the pandemic, then it is reasonable to expect that they will return when the pandemic is over. So from a legal perspective, asking somebody to is not changing the rules of engagement. However, from a human perspective, if somebody is really afraid, then I would just say, so what do you need to come back into the workplace and feel safe? So I'm not saying, do you want to just work from home forever? What do you need to come back to the workplace and feel safe? And then I ask the question, and this is so important, is they may say, well, I need everybody to wear masks. And I wouldn't say yes or no to that. I would say, and what else? And what else? And what else? Until they say, that's it, that's all. And then I would say, from a human rights perspective, I need to think about anything that we're asking of other people. So if we couldn't ask things of other people, that would eliminate this, this, and this. What else could we do then to make you feel safe if they're not wearing masks, or, and you just get down to, ultimately, is there a solution that you can accommodate them that would work? And if there's not, then they need to go and deal with their anxiety, because it's greater than something that can be accommodated.
Keeping your legal hat on a little bit here. What to do with an employee who may wish not to be vaccinated and other employees may be uncomfortable with that? There is a lot of talk about employers' role in that. I know this is a tricky subject, but one that has come up often in questions.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is get legal advice, because if the employee doesn't want to be vaccinated because of a prohibited ground under human rights, you have a duty to accommodate. So if I have an allergy, if I have an underlying condition that the vaccine is contraindicated, then you may be discriminating against me if you ask me to come back with a vaccination. from the lawyers that I've listened to, if you don't have a mandatory vaccination policy, then you better have one, if that's the intention. And a lot of people say, well, what is that? But school boards, healthcare, they've had mandatory vaccination policies around the flu vaccine for years. So you could go to, and many of them are public, you can go online and find that and see what it looks like. But in terms of a single individual who refuses to be vaccinated, you need to check it out. One lawyer said that you could require a daily COVID test, you could require them to wear a mask, you could require them to be isolated in terms of where they sit. But I strongly recommend seeking legal advice if this is a situation that you're dealing with.
It's a tricky one, and I know I'm putting you in a little bit on the spot on that one, but one that I know will continue to come up for the next bit. So another question that came in from the audience, and it's a little bit of a long question, so I'm using my phone here to kind of read it out.
Okay.
What is a good way to establish new goals for teams and employees during this transition? I'm transitioning back to the workplace. I'm worried that there could be bias that seems like that we're forcing people to go back to the office in order to hit their goals or have a different trajectory for their working in the office, at home, or hybrid.
So I'll just tell you, my first reaction to that is this isn't the time to set goals. When they're just coming back to work, when we talked about that graduated return to work, I mean, the goal is just to get back and adjust. And I would even, when we talk about setting goals and we talk about that, maybe that's week 3. And you've already got it in the list that first we're going to come back, we're going to do a reorientation and reintegration. We're going to, start to get back up to regular work, and then we're going to set new goals. But I wouldn't do it before they return, because I think it's undue pressure at a time when there's going to be a lot of pressure. That's my opinion on that.
And if for the person that asked that question that has a follow-up, we do have a few minutes, so I'm happy to jump in there. But for the time being, Mary, and I asked you at the beginning of what we've learned from COVID. And I'm now asking you to look in the crystal ball. We've made some great strides with the way we approach mental health, the way we discuss it in the workplace. Where are we moving forward? And where do you want to see workplaces in 2022 regarding the discussion around mental health and how we can support employees?
Yeah, I think the groundwork has been done with the National Standard of Canada on Psychological Health and Safety, with the development of the Guarding Minds at Work tool, with programs like Mindful Leader. So I think it's all there. It was there before the pandemic. I just think that more employers now are going to reach out, because they're going to realize that it's not just something that's nice to do, but it is the smart business decision, because most of us are part of the knowledge economy. I mean, I don't care whether you work at a restaurant, you're now dealing with a lot of technology, and you're dealing with a lot of a difference in what people are expecting. And so we need to be more emotionally intelligent as employees. And in order to maximize our emotional intelligence and our resilience, we need a psychologically safe workplace. So businesses who want to thrive are going to automatically understand that the way to do that is to have a psychologically safe work environment, and the tools and resources are already there.
Yeah. So if you're an employer on the call today and you're building your toolbox, what's included?
Like I say, I think we can complicate things by saying everybody should, align with the standard and do all the documentation, but that's not reasonable for a lot of employers at this time. But if you just ask the question, how might this that I'm doing impact psychological health and safety? And if you just ask the question before you interact with an employee, am I supporting their success at work? I think those two things alone are simple, they're low cost, they don't take a lot of time, and you could implement those right now and you could revolutionize your own management style. And yet you're not changing your style. You're not really having to shift a lot. You're just thinking about the repercussions in a way that's more mindful.
Question that came in from the audience, and this may be a little bit out your wheelhouse, but I'm an employer and I do have an employee assistance program included as part of my benefits program. Any tips on how to better integrate that with my employees, as I know the utilization is quite low?
Yeah. A few things to say on that. One is that you should use the EAP service yourself. And then when you go to recommend it to your employees, you're going to say, when I called, they answered after this many rings. They did an intake, and these are kind of the questions that they asked. I got somebody calling me back within so many days. I found them helpful in this way. What they didn't do is this. So now you're speaking about it not as something for those people, but for us people. There is also a way, and I know that not every employer understands this, but for you to negotiate how you want the EAP to respond and what kinds of things you want them to do. And on our website, we have a lot of things about how you negotiate an EAP contract in a way that supports mental health. So it's available to you. But employees don't want to utilize it because they don't know if it's really confidential, and they don't know if it's going to give them what they want. If you haven't negotiated it, EAP, like the sort of the starting point for EAPs, it doesn't do triage, meaning it doesn't diagnose or treat for mental illness. So you need to understand what is to be expected. Is it brief solution focused therapy, or is it, so meaning dealing with whatever it is they talk about? If they go and say my boss is difficult, then they spend the 4 to 7 appointments talking about the difficult boss, or do they really look at, is there an underlying issue? So you finding all this out, you trying the EAP, whether it's about dealing with an employee, if it's about a family issue, is it about elder care, it doesn't matter. You try it out, and then your recommendation will be more genuine.
Yeah, I imagine, as someone you've experienced many years in the space, the innovation that has occurred in the mental health world over the last 2-3 years has been impressive. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you see products in this focusing on employers going moving forward?
So mental health treatment has had leaps and bounds, and addiction treatment as well. Treatment for trauma, what we now understand that many addiction and mental health issues have underlying trauma or unresolved grief. And so understanding this means that treatment doesn't go on for years and years and years ineffectively. What I say to anybody who's struggling is the challenge is you have to be persistent until you find what will work for you, because your mental health issue, your addiction issue is layered on top of everything you've experienced, your personality, your family of origin. And so there is no cookie cutter approach, unfortunately, and you just have to be persistent until you get that breakthrough that will work for you, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's there. There's hope. Whereas I remember, Mike, even 20 years ago, when somebody had certain types of mental illnesses, we said, well, you're just going to have to live with it. There's no treatment. And we don't say that anymore.
Yeah. And that's the positive that we're seeing out of all of this. So, this is part for you, Marianne, who's really pushed this cause and have done some excellent work in the field. So we have a few moments left, and I want to give the opportunity for you to just talk a little bit about the workplace strategies for mental health and the work that you've done there, and how some of the participants can check this out and get the resources and learn more from you.
Great. So 14 years ago, Canada Life approached me, and I was a social worker dealing with people with mental illness and workplaces. And I thought, I don't want to work for an insurance company. I want to help people. 14 years ago, they said, that's what we want to do. We want to help. And all of the resources that are on workplace strategies for mental health are free in English and French to everybody, not just their clients, to anybody in the world, even though they're all focused on Canadians. And we've been able to do organizational strategies around policy and programs and processes. We've been able to help with people leaders strategies to really help you deal with things like, I've got an employee with dementia. I've got one that's dealing with domestic violence. I have to help prevent burnout, whatever it is, performance or conflict. There's resources there. And under employee resources are a plethora of things. We have also workshop materials so that you can do your own workshops, so that you don't have to pay for someone to come in, that you could facilitate it or somebody in your workplace. The point of all this is that these resources were all created not by just me, but by experts across the country who, when they understood that it was free to all Canadians, said, yeah, sign me up. I want to help. I want to create this with you. And so they're all evidence-based, and they're all very practical, because what I know from being a small business owner is I want to know it's credible, but I don't want to read all the theory and methodology. And, I don't want you to use big words. I don't want you to make it complicated. I want it to be easy for me to look at it and take action. And that's the way it's set up. So I really do hope that you check it out. It's workplace strategies for mentalhealth.com. And I know that's a big, long URL, but once you put it in once, it's easier to find.
Well, it is I was going to say, it is such a valuable tool. And I know many of our advisors do utilize that. And again, it's a free resource for everyone. So, Marianne, we're coming up on the hour. I want to thank you so much for your time today. Very insightful discussion, very practical for all of us. And I think you're able to really shine an important light on this topic. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Mike, for caring about this topic and bringing it to all the people that matter to you. Thanks.
And thank you for everyone who did participate today. This will be recorded and will be available after the presentation is completed. So if you want to review again or send to friends, colleagues, clients, anyone, this will be available. So thank you again for participating. And I hope everyone has a healthy and safe Wednesday.